My name is Leon Hawkins, and for 4 months straight, dinner was a 39-cent pack of instant noodles. Not because I was broke in the way people usually mean it, but because every extra dollar I spent on food was a dollar I couldn't spend on gas to go see my own kids. The woman who put me there was my wife of 11 years, Emma Walsh. A year before that ramen, I owned an HVAC company with my name on the trucks, a house I'd paid off 2 years early, and 2 kids who still ran to the door when I got home. Then, Emma sat across from me at our kitchen table with divorce papers already drawn up and a thread already loaded. Hand over the house, the business, the accounts, or I'd spend the rest of my life fighting to see my kids for 2 hours on weekends and losing. I'm not a soft man. I've climbed on roofs in July heat, fired guys twice my size, sat with my dad while he died. But I signed those papers with my hand shaking because I believed her, and because a man will do almost anything to not lose his kids. By the next month, I was renting one room above a laundromat, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, working for a rival company at $16 an hour with no name badge and no seniority. I used to run a 12-man crew. Now I was the guy nobody trained properly. Money wasn't the hard part. The arithmetic was. Rent, gas to drive across town for my supervised visits, the meter outside the courthouse. Whatever was left after that, I dropped in a coffee can under the sink with lawyer written on the side and marker. Ramen was cheap enough that it never touched that can. The food wasn't what wore me down. It was my son's voice on the phone. He was 7, calling from his mom's boyfriend's cell because my number had been blocked from the house line, whispering like he'd get in trouble for it. "Dad, when are you coming home? Mom's boyfriend sleeps in your bed now." I'd hold the phone and say nothing for a second, because if I talked first, my voice would crack, and I didn't want that to be the last thing he heard from me that night. There's one thing I did that night at the kitchen table that I didn't plan. My phone was already in my hand when Emma laid out her threat, and something in me hit record before she finished the sentence. 22 seconds of audio. Her voice, clear. "Sign the papers or you'll never see those kids again." I didn't delete it. I didn't know why yet. 118 nights of noodles. 118 nights doing gas money math before I fell asleep. Then on the 119th morning, someone knocked on my door before 7 a.m. Too early for my landlord, too early for anyone I owed money to. I opened it half-dressed, and a man in a suit worth more than my truck told me he was a family law attorney, and that what Emma did to me at that table had a legal name in Ohio, and that name meant every signature I'd put on those papers could be undone. I didn't trust him yet, but if anyone's ever used your own kids as leverage against you, you already know why I didn't shut the door. The attorney's name was Nathan Butler, and he didn't look like a man who had any business standing in the doorway of a room above a laundromat. He had an accent I couldn't place, cufflinks, and a leather folder tucked under his arm like it weighed more than he did. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, "I need 20 minutes. I almost shut the door on him. I'd had process servers and collection agents show up at that same hour before, and I was tired of being ambushed before I'd even had coffee. But something about the folder made me step aside. He sat on the only chair I owned. I sat on the edge of the mattress. He opened the folder and laid out 3 documents I didn't recognize. Bank statements, a printed email chain, and a single sheet with Ohio revised code sections highlighted in yellow. "Your ex-wife's attorney filed your divorce settlement 11 months ago," he said. "I've read it twice. It's not a divorce settlement. It's a shakedown with a judge's signature on it." I told him I didn't have money for a lawyer. He said he wasn't asking for money, not yet. He said a colleague of his had heard about my case through the family clerk's office, where apparently my name had come up more than once, and that firms like his sometimes took cases like mine on contingency, if the case was strong enough. "Is it strong?" I asked him. "You told me on the phone you have a recording," he said. "Play it for me." I pulled up the 22 seconds on my phone. Emma's voice filled that tiny room. "Sign the papers or you'll never see those kids again." And Nathan Butler didn't say anything for a second. He just looked at the recorder icon on my screen like it was worth more than the folder in his lap. "That's coercion," he said. "Under duress, a settlement like this can be vacated, thrown out, not appealed, vacated like it never happened." I'd heard lawyers talk in circles before. Emma's attorney had talked in circles for a year, while my visitation shrank from every weekend to every other weekend to whatever Emma felt like allowing. So I asked him straight, "What does that mean for me in real terms this month?" He told me it meant a hearing, not a quick one. Franklin County Family Court had a backlog, and Emma's attorney would fight the motion to vacate with everything they had. Because if the original settlement fell apart, so did every asset transfer inside it. The house, the business, all of it would be back on the table, this time in front of a judge who'd have to explain, on the record, how a man signed away everything he owned in one sitting with no attorney present and a threat about his kids sitting on top of the paperwork. It could take 4 months, he said, maybe 6. I did the math before he finished the sentence. 4 more months on $16 an hour. 4 more months of ramen and gas money and the coffee can under the sink. Except now they'd be filing fees too, and a hearing date I'd have to take unpaid time off work to attend. "And if we lose?" I asked. He didn't dress it up. "Then it stands. You stay where you are." I looked at that folder a long time before I said yes. We drove down to his office in Columbus 2 days later. A 40-minute drive I did in my work truck on my lunch break, still in my uniform, grease on my knuckles, sitting across a conference table from a man whose watch probably cost what I made in a month. He had me sign the recording over as evidence, sign a retainer agreement that cost me nothing up front, and sign a motion that would go in front of a judge in 6 weeks. Then he told me the part I wasn't ready for. "Ms. Walsh's attorney is going to argue you signed voluntarily," he said. "They're going to say you're a grown man who understood exactly what he was agreeing to. They're going to bring your son and daughter into it, argue that reopening the settlement isn't in the children's best interest, that it'll destabilize them. That's their whole defense. Not that the threat didn't happen, that it doesn't matter." I asked him if that could work. "It's worked before," he said. "That's why I need you to understand something before we file this. Once we move to vacate, there's no quiet version of this anymore. Ms. Walsh will know exactly what you have on her, and people who've been caught usually don't sit still." I told him I wasn't afraid of Emma. He looked at me like a man who'd said that sentence to a client before and watched it turn out to be wrong. 2 nights after we filed, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was my daughter's number. Except when I picked up, it wasn't my daughter's voice. It was Emma, and she wasn't threatening me this time. She was calm, which was worse. She said if she didn't drop the motion by Friday, I wouldn't like what her attorney found in my employment file. I didn't have anything to hide in my employment file. That's what scared me. The company I worked for ran 3 counties out of a yard in Springfield, 40 minutes from my room above the laundromat. I'd been there 5 months, showed up early, never called off, kept my head down. That Thursday morning, my supervisor pulled me off the truck before I'd even loaded my tools. "Office wants to see you," he said. He wouldn't look at me straight on. The owner's name was Daniel Powell. I'd met him twice, once at hiring, once at a Christmas cookout he threw for the crews. He wasn't a bad boss, but that morning he sat behind his desk with a folder open, and I recognized the posture. I'd seen it 2 weeks earlier across a different desk from Nathan Butler. "Leon, I got a call yesterday. Anonymous. Said you'd been padding hours on residential jobs, billing clients for time you didn't work." I told him that wasn't true, and I meant it. I clocked in and out on my phone like everyone else. He knew that. He pulled up my timesheets anyway, laid them next to invoices from 3 job sites, and for a second, even I felt my stomach drop because 2 of the invoice numbers didn't match what I remembered billing. "I didn't write those invoices," I said. "I don't have access to billing." "I know. That's what's strange. Somebody does, though, and somebody sent this to my personal email, not the company one. Whoever did this knew where to find me." I thought about Emma's voice on the phone 2 nights before. "You wouldn't like what her attorney found in my employment file." She hadn't said found, she said what her attorney found,
like it was already sitting there waiting, like it had been placed. I asked Daniel who had access to the billing system besides him and the office manager. Just us, and whoever the office manager talks to outside of work. She's engaged to a guy named Christopher Kelly, runs the books for a property management company across town. He said it like it meant nothing to him. It meant everything to me. Christopher Kelly was the name Emma's new boyfriend went by. I'd heard my son say it on the phone a dozen times without putting it together until that second. Mom's boyfriend, the one sleeping in my old bed, worked in property management. The same building, it turned out later, where Emma's divorce attorney's firm rented office space on the 3rd floor. I didn't say any of that to Daniel. I didn't have proof, only a feeling sitting hard in my chest, the kind you get when a pattern shows itself before you can explain it. Daniel told me he had to suspend me while he looked into it. Paid or unpaid, I asked. Unpaid, he said, and I watched 6 weeks of saved-up gas money and lawyer filing fees evaporate in my head before he'd even finished the sentence. I don't think you did this, he said, and I believed he meant it. But I've got clients calling. I have to be able to say I looked into it. I walked out of that office into a parking lot full of trucks with somebody else's name on them now, because mine had been peeled off 6 months earlier when the company took a hit updating their fleet decals, and I hadn't even noticed until that moment how much of my life had already been erased in small pieces before the big piece, my house, my business, ever got taken. I called Nathan Butler from the truck. I laid it out for him, the anonymous tip, the mismatched invoices, the office manager's fiancé, the fact that Christopher Kelly's company shared a building with Emma's divorce attorney. He went quiet on the line longer than I liked. That's not proof of anything in a courtroom, he finally said, but it tells me something. She's not waiting for the hearing. She's trying to make you unstable before we ever get in front of a judge. No job, no income, easier to paint as unreliable. It's the same playbook as the kitchen table. Take something away, force a decision. I asked him what I was supposed to do with no paycheck for 6 weeks. Survive it, he said. I know that's not what you want to hear, but if you drop the motion now over this, she wins twice. She still walks away with everything, and she teaches herself this works. I sat in that parking lot a long time after we hung up. I did the math again, the way I'd done it every night for 4 months. Rent, gas, the coffee can, and now $0 coming in until Daniel Powell decided whether he believed me. I drove back to the room above the laundromat instead of the grocery store that night. I didn't have 39 cents to spare, let alone 39 cents times whatever I'd need to eat for 6 weeks with no income. My phone buzzed once before I fell asleep. A text from a number I didn't recognize, no name attached, 3 words long.
I didn't answer the text. I sat there staring at those 3 words, drop it, last chance, until the screen went dark. Then I called Nathan Butler back even though it was almost midnight. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he wasn't sleeping either. Screenshot it, he said. Don't reply, don't block the number, don't delete it, and don't go anywhere alone tomorrow if you can help it. I asked him what that text was worth in a courtroom. Nothing by itself, he said. A burner number saying 3 words could be anybody. But if we can tie that number to someone connected to your case, it stops being a random threat and starts being witness intimidation. That's not a divorce issue anymore. That's criminal. He told me to meet him the next morning, not at his office in Columbus, but at a small investigator's office in Cincinnati. A man named Marcus he'd used before on cases where money or people needed tracing. I drove down at 6 a.m. on an empty stomach because I still didn't have 39 cents to spare, and I wasn't going to spend gas money on food I could skip. Marcus turned out to be an older guy, ex-cop, worked out of a converted house near Over the Rhine with 3 monitors and a coffee maker that never stopped running. Nathan gave him the burner number, the anonymous tip email Daniel Powell had shown me, and the names, Emma Walsh, Christopher Kelly, and the office manager from my old job, a woman named Kylan Ford. It took Marcus 4 hours to find what a year of my own worrying hadn't. The burner phone had been activated at a convenience store 2 blocks from the office building where Christopher Kelly worked, the same building where Emma's divorce attorney rented space on the 3rd floor. Marcus pulled the store's public parking lot camera footage, which was still available because the store kept 60 days of file, and there, time-stamped 4 days before Daniel pulled me off my truck, was Christopher Kelly walking in and walking out 2 minutes later with a small bag in his hand. "That's not proof he sent you a text," Marcus said, "but it's proof he bought a phone right before somebody sent you a text. And I've got something else." He pulled up records he said were public, but that I'd never have known how to find. A filing with the Ohio Secretary of State showing Kylen Ford, my old office manager, listed as a registered agent for a small LLC. The LLC's registered address was Christopher Kelly's apartment. The same apartment, court records from Emma's original divorce filing showed that Emma Walsh had listed her own new residence 8 months earlier. I sat there looking at 3 names on a screen that all led back to one address, and something Nathan had said in my first meeting with him came back to me, that once we filed to vacate the settlement, Emma would know exactly what I had on her, and people who get caught don't usually sit still. She hadn't sat still. She'd built a small circle around herself, and every person in it had a reason to make sure I never made it to that hearing. Nathan filed an emergency motion that same afternoon, attaching the burner number, the store footage, and the LLC filing, asking the court to treat the anonymous tip to my employer as retaliatory interference tied to the pending case. I didn't understand half the legal language in it. What I understood was that for the first time in a year, I wasn't the one playing defense. 2 days later, Daniel Powell called me himself instead of having my supervisor do it. "I want you back on the truck Monday," he said. "I had somebody pull the actual invoice logs, the real ones, not the ones that got emailed to me. Nothing you billed matched what got sent. Whoever built those fake invoices didn't do a good job matching your job numbers to actual addresses. Half of them are for houses that aren't even in our service area." I asked him if he was going to press charges against whoever sent it. "That's not really my fight," he said, "but I'll tell your lawyer everything I know if he asks." Nathan asked. Daniel gave a sworn statement 2 days after that, and for the first time since the divorce papers landed on my kitchen table, I had someone else's word backing up mine, instead of Emma's word standing alone against it. The hearing to vacate the settlement was still 6 weeks out, but the court moved fast on the retaliation motion because judges don't like hearing that someone's trying to sabotage a party mid-litigation. A magistrate scheduled an emergency conference for the following Tuesday in Dayton to address whether Emma or anyone acting on her behalf had violated a no-contact order that came standard with the original divorce filing. A no-contact clause I hadn't even known applied to third parties acting on her behalf until Nathan explained it to me in the car on the way home from Cincinnati. "If the magistrate finds she directed this," Nathan said, "it doesn't just help the retaliation claim. It corroborates everything about the original threat. It shows a pattern. Judges care about patterns." I should have felt something like relief driving back up I-75 that night. Instead, I felt what I'd felt every night for 4 months, that low, steady fear that sits in your chest and doesn't leave just because something good happened, because you've learned the good thing can get taken back just as fast as it showed up. I was right to feel that way. When I got back to my room above the laundromat that night, the door was already unlocked. I know I locked it. I always locked it. Old habit from growing up in a house where nothing stayed where you left it if you didn't lock it down. I stood in the doorway a long time before I stepped inside, because sitting on my mattress, square in the middle where I couldn't miss it, was a manila envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. I didn't open it that night. I called Nathan Butler instead, and for the second time in a week, he told me not to touch something until he could see it in person. Nathan told me to leave the envelope exactly where it was and step outside. I sat in my truck in the laundromat parking lot for 40 minutes waiting for him, watching the dryers glow orange through the ground floor window, wondering who'd had a key to my room or who hadn't needed one. He showed up with Marcus, the investigator, both of them pulling on gloves before they even got out of the car. Marcus photographed the envelope from every angle before anyone touched it, then opened it with a letter opener he kept in his jacket like he'd done this before. Inside were photographs, old ones, printed off what looked like a phone camera. Me, 11 years ago, at a bar with coworkers the week before I met Emma. Nothing had happened that night. I remembered it clear as anything, because I'd gone home early, alone, and started dating Emma 4 months later. But the photos were cropped tight enough, angled close enough, that they told a different story if you didn't already know the truth. A note was folded underneath them, no signature, 4 typed lines. This is what the judge sees if you don't drop the motion. Ask yourself if your kids need to see this too. Nathan read it twice and didn't say anything for a while. Marcus was the one who spoke first. "This isn't a threat anymore," he said. "This is evidence tampering, or it's about to be the second anyone tries to submit doctored photos to a family court. That's a felony in this state, not a custody dispute." I asked how someone got into my room. Nathan asked me who else had a key. I only had 2 answers: the landlord and Kaylin Ford, my old office manager, who'd once picked up a spare set of keys for me from the hardware store as a favor when I locked myself out during my first week in that room, back before any of this started, back when I still thought she was just a coworker doing me a kindness. Marcus pulled the store camera footage from the block again, the same way he had with Christopher Kelly's burner phone, and this time it took him less than an hour. Kaylin Ford's car parked outside the laundromat at 2:40 that afternoon, 15 minutes before I'd gotten off work. She was inside for 6 minutes, according to the timestamp on the store's exterior camera. My door had been locked when I left that morning. It wasn't locked when I got home. Nathan filed everything that night: the envelope, the photographs, the note, Marcus's footage, an affidavit tying it to the LLC address that already connected Kaylin Ford, Christopher Kelly, and Emma Walsh together on paper. He told me the emergency conference on Tuesday wasn't going to be about a no-contact violation. It was going to be about whether the court needed to refer the entire matter to the county prosecutor. I didn't sleep much before that hearing. I kept thinking about my son's voice on the phone, whispering like he wasn't supposed to be talking to me at all. And I kept thinking that whatever happened Tuesday, I wanted him to grow up knowing his father didn't fold the second things got hard, even when folding would have been easier. The conference room in the Montgomery County Courthouse wasn't the big courtroom I had imagined for a year. It was small, fluorescent lit, a magistrate at a plain desk instead of a bench. Emma sat across the room with her attorney. She didn't look at me once. Christopher Kelly wasn't there. Neither was Kaylin Ford, though her attorney was, sitting 2 seats down from Emma's, which told me more than anything anyone said out loud that morning. Nathan laid it out in order: the original recording, the anonymous tip to my employer, the burner phone tied to Christopher Kelly's purchase, the LLC filing linking all 3 names to one address, and finally the envelope with the doctored photographs and Kaylin Ford's car parked outside my door 15 minutes before I found it. The magistrate didn't interrupt once. When Nathan finished, she asked Emma's attorney if he had a response. He didn't have much of one. He said his client had no knowledge of any envelope, any burner phone, any tip to my employer. He said it 3 times the way people say something when they're hoping repetition does the work that evidence can't. The magistrate didn't rule that day on the original divorce settlement. That hearing was still 2 weeks off, but she granted an emergency protective order barring Emma, Christopher Kelly, and Kaylin Ford from any contact with me or my employer, and she referred the tampering evidence directly to the prosecutor's office, on the record, in front of everyone in that room. 2 weeks later, at the actual hearing to vacate the settlement, Emma's attorney didn't fight it the way Nathan warned me he would. He couldn't. Between the original recording and everything Marcus dug up in the weeks after, there wasn't a version of he signed voluntarily that held together anymore. The judge vacated the settlement in full. My house, still sitting in Emma's name for the past year, reverted to joint ownership pending a new division of assets. My business filings, which Emma's attorney had used to strip me of ownership in the original papers, were unwound. And custody, full 50-50, no more supervised 2-hour visits, was restored pending a new hearing.
with the judge noting on the record that the original custody terms had been obtained under circumstances the court can no longer treat as voluntary. I picked my son and daughter up that Friday for the first real weekend I'd had with them in over a year. My son didn't say anything about the boyfriend or the bed this time. He just grabbed my hand walking out to the truck, the same way he'd grabbed it walking out to the yard when he was 3 years old and didn't want to fall behind. I didn't get rich. I didn't get some fortune I never knew about. What I got back was what should have never been taken: my name on my own business again, my house, and 2 kids who ran to my truck instead of away from it.